When the alarm sounds and you've got the rig, you own it. You're not only responsible for the equipment and the people with you, but you've got to look out for the entire driving population between you and the emergency. You want to get there quickly, but what's more important, you've got to get there in one piece. You own it. It's in your hands. And when you've packed it all up for the 5th time that shift, and you're really beat, you still own it. You've still got to get everyone and the rig back home again. No matter where it is, city, suburbs, or country, working fire or false alarm, when you drive it, you own it. And if you own it, you'd better be more than just a competent driver. You've got to be really good. How do you become good? Learn the proper techniques, understand your equipment, and practice. These students are doing just that. They're some of the thousands of firefighters the National Academy for Professional Driving teaches to drive every year. Dick Turner, the chairman of NAPD.
Driving a piece of fire apparatus is totally unlike driving almost anything else. It's big, heavy, unwieldy, and quite a chore to handle. And it can be dangerous if handled improperly. Some of the techniques we're going to show you may seem strange at first. Let me assure you that everything you're going to learn has been carefully researched and tested by NAPD. But don't take anything for granted, because other than the laws of nature, nothing is absolute. There is no absolutely best way to drive a piece of fire equipment, because the condition of the vehicle, the road, the weather, and your mental attitude are always changing. There are, however, some things you can learn and do which will make you a better, safer, and more efficient driver. Just remember, if anything you see here is contrary to your department's policies, don't do it. Discuss it, perhaps, to see if it might work for you, but clear it with your department first. To learn what we're going to teach you and become a good driver, your mind has to be alert and open for input. So the first thing you must do is drop 3 words from your vocabulary. But I always steer that way. But I always take a corner like that. But I always brake when I. You've got to forget those 3 words. Keep an open mind and give our methods a try.
Fire apparatus are complicated pieces of machinery. Each one is built for a special purpose, has different equipment, and is used in a particular manner. But when it comes to driving them on the road, they're all governed by the same laws of physics.
There are basically only 3 things a vehicle can do. Go, stop, turn. Any motion is a combination of these 3 basic movements. Let's look at go. Very often, people think that go means go as fast as you can. That's not only dangerous, but it's not the quickest way to get where you're going. Go starts with acceleration, and the key here is smoothness. If your vehicle is an automatic, press down on the accelerator evenly. If you've got a standard, let the clutch out smoothly. As you feel it begin to engage, keep the action even until the clutch is all the way out. If you don't, there could be trouble. If you pop the clutch on a manual transmission or pounce on the accelerator, the jolt affects the vehicle and everyone on it. The entire vehicle is in a state of shock. The vehicle is out of balance, and your tires are not providing as much traction as possible. You're not driving efficiently, and you're losing time.
3.50.
3.50 seconds. One simple rule. Keep your feet slow, squeeze the accelerator. We know the adrenaline's pumping and you want to get there quickly. But if you want to be quick, you've got to be smooth. .21. 3.21 seconds. A few tenths of a second doesn't sound like much, but those fractions add up in a hurry. Rough movements are not only hard on the equipment, but also cost you valuable time. As you can see, smoother is quicker. Do you have someone in your company who bounces the vehicle out of the station every time he or she drives it? Here's a technique you can use with a manual transmission vehicle that can get it moving without stalling or over-revving the engine and without making the front end jump up and down the first 10 feet out of the station. As you are ready to move, bring your engine RPM up slightly over idle speed, let off the accelerator, and at the same time let out the clutch with a smooth, deliberate motion. The decreasing RPMs will help the clutch engage smoothly, and the torque of the engine will start the vehicle in motion. Now, push the accelerator, and you are underway efficiently without jumping the front up and down, and without burning the clutch plates. As a general rule, the heavier the piece of equipment, the more this maneuver will help. Stopping consists of three components: perception and reaction, action, and traction. First, you must identify, analyze, then react to the situation. You then decide to put your foot on the brake pedal. That's perception and reaction. Action is the physical act of putting your foot on the pedal, pushing it down, and the time it takes for the brakes to start working. And finally, as the wheels slow down and the vehicle stops, you are in the traction mode. We've mounted some special equipment on an engine to show you how this works. I'm going to signal the driver to stop when I push down on this button. As I do, a special marking device will fire chalk on the pavement, marking the start of the test. When the driver's foot hits the brake pedal, a second blast of chalk will be automatically fired, marking how far the vehicle traveled while the driver was reacting to the stop command. Finally, we'll mark where the vehicle stops. Okay, Bob, what we're going to do this time is get the engine up to 30 miles an hour, and as you come into the pylons, I'm going to detonate the first round. As soon as you hear it go off, you put your foot on the brakes and stop as quickly as possible. You ready?
All set.
Okay, let's do it.
The vehicle traveled approximately 19 feet before the driver could react and apply the brakes. So, no matter how quick you think your reflexes are, reacting to a situation still takes time, and time means extra stopping distance. There's been a lot of controversy about the quickest way to stop a vehicle. Now watch what really works. This engine is being driven at 40 miles per hour. At the first cones, the driver hits the brakes as hard as possible, locking the wheels. This is potentially very dangerous, for all steering control is lost in a locked wheel skid. Many people think the quickest way to stop is to pump or stab the brakes. By using this technique, the driver was able to stop the vehicle more quickly, but it still took 110 feet. The best way to stop a fire vehicle, or almost any vehicle for that matter, is to apply the brakes to the point of incipient skid. That is, just before the wheels lock up, and hold that pressure. Compared to the stab technique, braking to the point of incipient skid shortened the distance about 10 feet, and over 24 feet shorter than when the wheels were locked. For any vehicle to stop or turn, the wheels must be rolling. By locking the wheels, you have effectively given up control of the vehicle, for it will skid basically straight ahead. No matter how much you turn the steering wheel, the vehicle will continue in the direction it was going if you lock up the wheels.
It's bad enough to get into a skid in a passenger car, but when you're driving tons of fire apparatus, The main rule regarding skids is don't. If you find yourself in a skid, the best thing to do is ease off the brakes and steer in the direction you want to go.
There is only a given amount of force that can be applied between the tires and the road before a vehicle loses traction and starts to skid or slide. This force can vary greatly depending upon the weight of the vehicle, condition of the tires, and the coefficient of friction of the road surface. If the brakes are locked and the tires stop turning, the vehicle will slide. We have gone beyond 100% of the possible traction available in that situation.
What you may not realize, however, is that when you turn the steering wheel, you effectively apply braking pressure between the tires and the road. A 20-degree change in steering direction from straight ahead can apply approximately 30% of the braking you have available. If we drive this pumper forward at 10 miles per hour and allow it to coast to a stop, starting at the pylon, it will take approximately 160 feet to stop.
It's 157.5 feet.
If we repeat the experiment and turn the wheels about 20 degrees, we'll find that it stops in only 65 feet. As you can see, the resistance provided by the tires turning acted as a braking force.
That was 65 feet.
Therefore, if you're at the limit of your vehicle's braking capability when traveling straight ahead, you must reduce your braking pressure as you turn, or you'll find yourself in trouble. Here's a good way to remember this. I have tied one end of this rope to the steering wheel and the other end to my foot. As I turn the steering wheel, my foot is pulled up. As I return the steering wheel to the center position, my foot is allowed to go down. Driving as if there were an invisible rope attached between the wheel and my brake foot will help to balance the vehicle and do a lot to reduce the possibility of a skid. From the moment you start driving the truck, you are steering it. The smoothest, most efficient way to steer is what we call shuffle steering. Now, I know it's going to feel weird when you first try it, but let me assure you, it's the best way. You may have originally been taught to steer from the 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock position, so if you try that a couple times, you'll feel that that movement tends to pull on your tricep muscles. These are the muscles in the back of your arm. Now, if you move down to the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock position, you start working your biceps and you start working your forearms more, and you get a smoother, easier motion as you turn the wheel back and forth. Now, instead of an imaginary rope, we're going to assume that there's an imaginary line that runs through the steering wheel from the 12 o'clock to the 6 o'clock position. When turning the wheel, the right hand must stay on the right side of this line and the left hand on the left side of it. For example, if we want to turn to the left, we put our left hand on top of the wheel and we feed the wheel through our hands, left to right, turning back the other way, right to left. At no time do our hands pass the center or the imaginary line on the steering wheel that runs between 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. As you can see, you can shuffle steer very smoothly, make the piece of equipment do whatever you want it to do. What I'm sitting in right now is a piece of fire apparatus, but it's not an emergency vehicle. Although the words differ slightly from state to state or jurisdiction, this engine only becomes an emergency vehicle when responding to an emergency with its lights on and audible warning signals in operation. That made us an emergency vehicle, but we still have no right to force our way through traffic. The lights and siren are asking for permission to pass. If you should force someone off the road or collide with them, you may be legally liable for that accident. That kind of responsibility, as well as the emergency, builds stress. And the effects of stress can be measured. Bob was hooked up to an electronic device that monitored his blood pressure and pulse. His pulse was 65 when we started. As we rolled and hit the siren, his pulse jumped. And when we added a little bit of excitement to the situation, it jumped even further.
When responding to a call, stress builds. Muscles begin to tense. Usually the first sign is gripping the steering wheel in a stranglehold. Secondly, a driver begins to ignore things that are not directly in his line of sight.
How do you handle it? By being aware and making it part of the routine. During a scan of the gauges, add hands and eyes to the checklist. Speedometer, mirrors, air pressure, hands. Look left, look right, speedometer, mirrors, etc. By dealing with it as part of the normal routine, you can take a lot of stress out of the situation.
Almost everyone has been taught to drive defensively. When driving to an emergency, however, you also have to drive offensively. This means driving so that you control the situation rather than letting other traffic control your movements. This doesn't mean forgetting the principles of defensive driving, but learning an additional set of skills.
You have to create what we call the offensive safety lane. When traveling down the road, the object is to create an imaginary bubble of space around your vehicle. You also want the vehicle to appear as big and prominent as possible to traffic around you. Obviously, you must have your siren and all of your lights on, but if at all possible, you should also try to occupy the extreme left part of your traffic lane and maintain this position.
By establishing this position, your equipment will appear much larger when viewed in the mirrors of vehicles ahead of you, persuading drivers to pull over. This position will also be more visible to oncoming traffic and help convince them to pull over as well. Sometimes traffic is so heavy that the only way through is to cross the line and use the opposing lane. If you do cross the line, you must be extra alert and account for all lanes of traffic, particularly at intersections. People will do strange things when confronted by a piece of fire apparatus on a call. This does not give you license to cross over into lanes of oncoming traffic or to force vehicles off the road. Your lights, your siren, and your actions are asking for permission to pass.
Think of the offensive safety lane as driving inside a huge balloon. The size of this imaginary balloon is determined primarily by your vehicle's speed. The balloon changes in size as your speed changes. If you can't stay within its boundaries, you're going to burst the balloon and perhaps hurt some people and equipment too. How do you determine the boundaries? By knowing the equipment and knowing how long it takes to stop. Remember, there are no absolutes. The tests conducted today, or those you conduct tomorrow, are only truly valid for that moment. They will, however, give you a pretty good indication of how things may happen in a similar situation.
Taking a corner in a piece of fire apparatus when traveling a little too quickly can be a humbling experience.
That's right. Nothing can raise your pucker factor quicker. The whole key to corners is get most of the braking done before you start the turn. Remember our little experiment with the rope? Also, start your turn from as wide a position as possible. This will give you more control and evasive ability as you enter the street or area in which you are turning. If you start your turn too close to the curb, you may be forced into the path of oncoming traffic.
You've been taught how to handle situations that were under your control. But what do you do when the situation is about to control you? Suppose the driver of the car in front of you suddenly slams on his brakes instead of pulling over. You've got to react quickly and instinctively.
Remember, there is no specific action that is correct in every situation. But most of the time, your best bet is steer, don't brake. Try to steer around the obstacle. You know a piece of fire apparatus isn't going to stop on a dime. But as big and heavy as it is, it can still maneuver more than you might expect in an emergency. We've set up an accident avoidance simulator course to show you what we mean. The truck enters the course at 25 miles per hour, and at the last moment, the simulator reveals 3 circles, each representing a traffic lane to the driver. Based on the colors, the driver must choose the proper lane to drive into and either continue at speed, slow down, or stop. In the space of only 65 feet at 25 miles per hour, a 15-ton fire engine can be driven into another traffic lane and do so under control.
Driving a piece of fire apparatus is mostly a mental process. Sure, you have to learn to coordinate physical skills, but probably 90% of it is mental.
The most important piece of equipment to put into gear properly is your mind. Think about what you are doing. Remember, slow and smooth is quicker. Create an offensive safety lane and steer. Don't lock up your brakes. Remember, it's in your hands.
San Francisco up a third over the past year. News Center 4's Sandra Jin explains just how most of these crack-ups happen.
San Francisco City fire trucks have gotten into more accidents because officials say there are simply more emergency calls. Of those accidents last year, 55 involved slamming into parked cars or buildings. 50 were collisions with other vehicles. 2 hit other fire trucks. 20 were intersection collisions, and 6 were classified as other kinds of accidents. Andrew Allen's parked Toyota was sideswiped by a fire truck rushing to a medical emergency.
They were like really going fast and it was in the middle of like traffic or whatever. And it just came through and I heard the crunching noise and it's like, oh, not my car.
Fire officials admit though the accidents are minor, 20% involve drivers hired after a hiring freeze was lifted only a few years ago.
We have an influx of new people that are doing the driving and they're trained, but they don't have the experience of 5 or 6 years.
One solution would be designated skilled drivers for all engines, but Richardson says San Francisco has no pay incentive for that job.
If we could pay our drivers any amount, then the people that maybe had a higher rate of accidents, we could send them for additional training or take them out of the driver's position.
The fire department did not have figures readily available on who's at fault in these cases, but the city paid $28,000 in claims for the accidents last year. Fire officials say red lights and sirens aren't always enough. Turn down your radio, open the window, be alert at intersections even if the light is green, and yield the right-of-way. If your car is parked unattended like Andrew Allen's was, the city will pay for the damage.
But still, it is an inconvenience.
In San Francisco, Sandra Jin, News Center 4.
San Francisco porn king and murder suspect Jim Mitchell is free on bail.